We now call the meeting to order. If you could please pay attention to Council Member Ortiz for the invocation, to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise if you're able.
Is Pastor Divers out there? Come on up, Pastor. The Bible says, be also ready. You know that verse? I know that verse. They give you a couple of weeks off and you forget what you're doing. So can you lead us in a word prayer?
Most certainly.
Thank you.
Shall we pray? Father, we just thank you this evening for your many blessings you bestowed upon us. Thank you, Lord, for this time to come and share on this evening. God, we pray for your wisdom, for your knowledge, for your understanding, for all that are present, that you will bless us, Lord, that we can flow in unity. Lord, that we can better our conditions here in Topeka. Let us address the issues necessary. God, give us a compassion for the people of our city. Bless us now, Lord Jesus. Let your peace abide. Let your love be demonstrated. We ask it in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Bless you. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So the first thing that I'll start the meeting by stating is that Councilmember Lesser is not feeling well tonight. He has sent his excuses, and we wish him well and a speedy recovery. So therefore, he will not be attending. In addition to that, substitution for Councilmember Lesser, we have a new mayor for you, and it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Garrett Shore. Mr. Garrett Shore is joining us because part of the Great Futures Gala, part of Boys and Girls Club, they had an auction for several items. One of those items was a day as the chief. One of the items was a day as the chief of the fire department as well. And another one was a day as the mayor. So I have had the delight of sitting with Mr. Shore, Mayor Shore, pardon me, pardon the disrespect. And not only meeting with Mayor Shore, but also meeting with his family in my office prior to being here. And he made some pretty insightful questions. He wanted to know a little bit of what I like about the job, and he wanted to know a little bit about, you know, what were some of the challenges, and he wanted to know what was the most expensive thing that we had approved. And I kind of showed him a little bit of the budgets, and I showed him some of the breakdowns of the bonds that we're going to address tonight, and his eyes just popped up. So what I think that everybody should know is that for us as the council, children are extremely important. They're not our future, they're our now. And when presented with the opportunity to spend some time with Mr. Shore, I said absolutely, and even more so, because the reason that he was chosen and selected, aside from the fact that Council Member Clear strongly bid so that a child could have this experience, so thank you for that, for supporting the Boys and Girls Club, was that he was chosen because he was the example during this summer of superation. I mean, he was the one that worked really hard, started the year. He and I were talking about how we kind of make fools of ourselves sometimes. Just today, I posted a video encouraging people to vote, and I had almonds stuck in my teeth. But I still didn't put down the video. But we sometimes make a fool out of ourselves, and the important thing is to get up and keep on moving. And Mr. Shore demonstrated those values. When he came into the club, maybe there were a little bit of challenges, but he, at the end of the day, by the end of the summer, had demonstrated his qualities as a leader. And it is my delight to have him here. So I'm going to ask all of you to recognize Mayor Shore as he reunites with his family. So now the rest of the meeting could be this much fun. We now proceed with presentation. City Manager. No presentations today. Okay, so we proceed with the roll call.
Mayor De Lisa,
Here.
Councilmembers Hiller,
Here.
Clear, Ortiz,
Here.
Emerson,
Here.
Padilla,
Here.
Jensen,
Present.
Mays,
Here.
Cohen,
Here.
and Lester.
We now proceed with appointments.
A is a board appointment recommending the appointment of Jeffrey Williams to the City of Topeka ADA Advisory Council for a term ending August 8, 2020. B is a board appointment recommending the appointment of Eric Wood to the City of Topeka ADA Advisory Council to fill an unexpired term ending October 2, 2019. C is a board appointment recommending the appointment of Clyde Swank to the Topeka Sustainability Advisory Board for a term ending August 8, 2020. D is a board appointment recommending the appointment of Jamie Crispin to the Topeka Human Relations Commission to fill an unexpired term and a full term expiring March 8, 2021. E is a board appointment recommending the appointment of Louis Estrada to the Topeka Human Relations Commission to fill an unexpired term expiring on February 29, 2020. F is a board appointment recommending the reappointment of Robin Jennison to the Topeka Shawnee County Riverfront Authority Board for a term ending July 2, 2021. G is a board appointment recommending the reappointment of Katrina Ringler to the Topeka Planning Commission for a term ending September 30, 2021. And H is a board appointment recommending the reappointment of Brian Armstrong to the Topeka Planning Commission for a term ending September 30, 2021.
We have heard the appointments. After the vote, we will recognize the members that are here today. What is the pleasure of the body? Councilwoman Hiller.
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve by Councilmember Hiller, a second by Councilmember Cohen. All those, we now proceed with the voting. The mayor does not vote.
We have 8 yes.
8 having voting yes, the motion passes. Can the members that have just been reinstalled or installed in the committees please stand up so that you could be recognized? Thank you so much. We now proceed with the consent agenda if the clerk would. Oh, I have to recognize Councilmember Emerson?
For a noise resolution.
Oh. I am aware of this, but I apologize. I did not know I had to speak on it.
Okay, we had a request to add a noise resolution to the consent agenda for a outside event for Saturday. And we received that yesterday, so we need to request to add this to the consent agenda for approval.
I would make that request, please.
We have a motion and we have a second by Deputy Mayor. Do we need to vote on this? I don't think we do. I think that if there's no objection, that we could proceed with the voting with the inclusion of this item into the agenda.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so if you could read the consent agenda, thank you.
A is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Karen Hiller approving a special event known as the Cruise in the Capitol Car Show. B is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Karen Hiller granting Greater Topeka Partnership an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at seat concerning noise prohibitions. C is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Karen Hiller approving a special event known as the First Friday Alley Party. D is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Carolyn Hiller granting Downtown Topeka Inc. an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at seat concerning noise prohibitions. E is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Tony Emerson granting Ebenezer Baptist Church an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at seat concerning noise prohibitions. F is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Sylvia Ortiz granting Preston Walker an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at seat concerning noise prohibitions. G is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout granting various neighborhood organizations accept an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at seat concerning noise prohibitions. H is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout allowing and approving city expenditures for the period of June 2, 2018 through June 29, 2018, and enumerating said expenditures therein. I are minutes of the regular meeting of July 17, 2018. There's a list of open after midnight applications for approval. K is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Tony Emerson granting the Landing Grill and Bar an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-158C concerning notice prohibitions.
We have heard the consent agenda. What is the pleasure of the body? Deputy Mayor?
Motion to approve.
Deputy Mayor makes a motion for approval. Councilmember Emerson makes a second. If there is no further comment, we now proceed with the voting.
Mayor. We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now proceed with the action items, if the clerk would read.
A is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout authorizing and providing for the issuance of $7,225,000 aggregate principal amount of general obligation bond series 2018A and $5,285,000 aggregate principal amount of general obligation bond series 2018B for zoo projects of the City of Topeka, Kansas, providing for the levy and collection of an annual tax for the purpose of paying for the principal of and interest on said bonds as they become due, authorizing certain other documents and actions in connection therewith, and making certain covenants with respect thereto.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. At this time, I'd like to invite Jeff White forward to comment on our bond law and sale process, and then Nikki Lee will reveal the results of our bond sale today. This generally covers A, B, and C on the agenda. We're kind of lumping the initial discussion on all of them, and we'll take individual questions if there are.
Thank you. Mr. White?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Jeff White with Columbia Capital. It's our honor to serve as the city's financial advisor for its bond transactions. And Mayor, your comments earlier were very prescient. Anytime we're talking about bonds, we're having fun, right?
Sure.
Okay. I'm just going to pretend that that's a yes. So before we ask you to confirm the results of today's very busy bond sale calendar, I wanted to walk you through a quick tour of the city's debt. Tonight I'm going to focus on general obligation bonds and temporary notes. You'll see me again next week to talk about revenue bonds and state revolving loan funds. I will try and be quick. You have a heavy agenda tonight, but feel free to stop me if you've got questions along the way. So in Kansas, cities have a relatively finite number of structures in which they can borrow. They can do bonds, they can do notes, or state-sponsored loans like state revolving loan funds for water and wastewater projects. Tonight we're talking about general obligation bonds and temporary notes, which also are general obligation. General obligation bonds in Kansas are all what are called unlimited pledge. What that means is when you approve the issuance of general obligation bonds, with that is also a pledge that you will raise taxes as high as they have to go for as long as they have to go in order to make sure that the principal and interest payments on those bonds are made in full and on time. So we're effectively pledging what's called the full faith and credit of the city's tax base for the repayment of those bonds. And as a result, general obligation bonds are generally seen as the most secure form of debt that a city can issue. In Kansas, in addition to general obligation bonds, where we can issue out to 30 years maximum under the statutes also contemplate the issuance of temporary notes. And as we talk about temporary notes, what I want to have you click in your mind is a temporary note is basically a one-year general obligation bond. It has all of the same security for bondholders that a long-term bond does. Just happens to be that it's a relatively short term. The city has historically done one-year notes. We can actually do temporary notes up to 4 years. The reason we do one-year notes here is that we get a marketing advantage by keeping those notes short and allowing those notes to be purchased in what are called money market funds. As I mentioned, state law generally limits the final term on general obligation bonds to 30 years. Over the past 5 or 6 years, the city has actually, for the most part, done 15-year bonds, and even historically going back no more than 20 years. Pretty rare to go longer than that. Through the great work of this council and the staff and your predecessor councils, the city has the third highest general obligation bond rating available. Standard & Poor's provides the city's bond rating. The city's bond rating is a AA. So you can be AAA, AA plus or AA, third highest category, which is outstanding. The city's temporary notes are rated on a different scale. The city actually carries the highest possible rating on its temporary notes. So in your packet, there was a brief memo, and I see a couple of you flipping to that. On the third page of that, you'll see a little chart that shows a picture of your outstanding debt. Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. There's a couple things that I want to note on here. The first thing that's very important is you have what we call downward sloping debt service demands. So you can see that next year has the highest amount of debt service that's scheduled to be paid across any year going out to 2036. The reason that's important is that when we come back next year to finance a portion of your capital improvement program, we can issue debt next year, layer it on top of the debt that exists today, and not put upward pressure on the mill levy that's necessary to pay off these bonds. And so by having that nice downward slope, we're able to have a routine borrowing program that allows you to implement your CIP without having to have a constant conversation about, do we need to raise the mill levy for the debt service fund? Because if you continue on the path that you've been on over the last 10 years or so, the answer to that question is no. I would also note that the city has a very quick repayment term. 70% of your debt will be paid off in the next decade. So it's a very, very fast repayment term, and that actually you'll see in the S&P rating report, that was one of the credit positives they noted, was how quickly the debt's paid off. On page 4, I actually made a prediction when I wrote this memo in July that the city CIP would not put any pressure on the city's rating as we issued bonds for 2018, and that indeed turned out to be the case. S&P recently affirmed the city's AA rating status. I'd also note there's a chart in the middle of the page which shows that the city's fiscal discipline has paid off in this area. The council has had an informal policy for a long, long time of only issuing or authorizing to be issued $9 million a year in general obligation bonds. You're actually paying off more principal than that each year. And as a result, the city's has a trend line of debt outstanding that's going downward. And when we look at debt outstanding as a percentage of your tax base, the tax base that we'd have to levy against in order to pay the bondholders if push came to shove, as a percentage, it's also declining as well. So you have less leverage of your tax base as well.
Okay, Jeff, this is fun.
Is it? Good. Yes, absolutely. So the very last page gives you a little bit of discussion about why do temporary notes versus just issuing general obligation bonds. Off the top, I'm going to go very quickly. You can read this later if you are finding yourself short of sleep tonight. But the city has historically issued bonds to finance special assessment projects, and the way those actually work in the statute, the project has to be done and assessed before it can go to bonds. And so we issue temporary notes to get the project to the point where it's constructed, finalized, assessed, and then we can roll it into bonds. The combined utility, we'll talk about them next week, but they don't have under their issuance statutes a temporary note kind of a structure. And so we use temporary notes in the city to finance work in progress from the combined utility as well, which is a benefit to those ratepayers. The use of temporary notes allows us to get to this point each year and know exactly what we need to borrow for a specific project. So we use temporary notes as work in progress. When the project is final or near final, we have a good sense of what we need to borrow long term, and so we don't find ourselves in a situation, at least not very often, where we've issued bonds and we can't use the proceeds, because typically when the city's issuing bonds, it already knows how much the project cost. And then lastly, in most interest rate environments, if you think about, we talk about yield curve all the time. If you picture in your mind, if you borrow overnight, it's going to be the lowest borrowing cost. If you borrow for 30 years, it's going to be the highest borrowing cost. And so when we're talking about borrowing for a year, that in most interest rate environments produces a lower borrowing cost than borrowing for 15 or 20 years. And so using temporary notes gives us the ability to keep a very low cost of borrowing while those projects are under construction, and then and only then do we convert those into 15-year final maturity bonds and pay that higher rate. The other thing that is interesting is that in most markets, the city's temporary notes have a cost that's about the same as the city's yield on its cash. And so there's actually a little bit of an arbitrage play there as well. So today, for instance, we sold tax-exempt notes at a 1.71%. I looked the city's portfolio yield to maturity on its investments at the end of June was just shy of 2%. So you actually keep cash in your pocket earning 2%, you borrow at 1.71%. If you spend that money fast enough, you actually get to keep the difference. So with that, Madam Mayor, like I said, I'll be back next week to talk about revenue bonds. We had a very busy day on your behalf in the bond market, and I'm excited for you to hear the results of that, but certainly happy to answer any questions.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. White? Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it's fun too, but what I find, as you know, is that I'm less worried about what our bond rate is than how much money we're spending.
Sure.
And I did read through this, your 5-page piece earlier today, and I really appreciate it because it's easy to follow, and I thank everybody for that. I am concerned, though, if we can talk about all three of these together. We're proposing to do $49 million in temp noting this year.
Yes.
If I got my calculator right, that's almost $1 million worth of interest in 1 year on those temp notes.
Yeah, that's about right.
And we've got a room full of people that would like us to loosen up money for affordable housing, and of course all of us that want to do other things. So is that really the most, is there any other way we can reduce that amount of cost that, to me, just is going out the window?
Yes, I mean, you have a fundamental choice when you implement your CIP, and it's this constant battle of what do we pay for with cash today, and what do we finance over time. And in my mind, the key distinction of that is this concept of intergenerational equity, right? The more that you pay for in cash today, the more burden of those capital projects you put on today's taxpayers. So you're asking today's taxpayers to pay a higher share of infrastructure that's going to last 30, 40, 50 years in some cases. By extending the term of the payment for that infrastructure, you're not only paying for it today, but your kids are going to pay for it tomorrow as they use that infrastructure. So it's a fairer way to spread the cost of 30 or 40-year life infrastructure over generations that will live in Topeka today, tomorrow, next week, a year from now. So the way to pay less interest is to borrow less money, but there are that decision isn't free. So we use the city's cash, and as I mentioned, for every dollar of the city's cash that you're using, you're creating a 2% opportunity cost because we could invest that money and generate that 2% yield. Certainly that's an easy choice, I think, for temp notes today, right? If you can borrow effectively for free and you get all these other benefits, why not do it? It's a harder choice when you're borrowing money at 4% for long-term bonds, right? So we're not earning that in cash. But if we don't fund those projects, you're either not reinvesting in your infrastructure, and we know that maintaining things today is way cheaper than replacing them 10 years from now, right? Tons of academic research about this in the municipal space. If you patch potholes today, it's way cheaper than rebuilding roads down to the roadbed 10 or 15 years from now. And the same thing goes for water infrastructure or anything else that you do. And if you pay for those, if you're going to do those things because it's right to do the investment and you don't borrow, then you've got to pay cash. And that means that you're spending $1 more on a capital project that you're probably not going to spend on affordable housing or police services or animal control or code enforcement because there's only a finite amount of dollars available. So I think it's a perfect question to ask. But not paying interest is not free, I guess, is the message I'd want to leave you with. And particularly when we're still looking at interest rates that are substantially below 20 or 30-year averages, in my mind, it's actually a time to maybe do more debt investment, because if you look over an historical context, it's less costly to do it now than it might be 5 years from now. Now, I'm a guy that, does debt for a living, so you keep that in mind as well.
Thank you. I wanted to, I'm still concerned. I appreciate the work that we've done already to reduce, to get what we wanted done without as much borrowing. We've got a lot backlogged and interest rates are going up. So these charts are not going to, I don't see how they can stay flat with.
It gets tougher. As interest rates go up, you're either doing less project, you're paying debt over a longer period of time. So yeah, we have been in a situation for a decade since the credit crisis where long-term borrowing rates have been incredibly affordable. If those normalize, and I say if because everybody's been saying it's going to happen next year since 2010, right? So if those normalize, we're all going to feel that. It's not just municipal borrowing, it's car loans and home mortgages and the whole deal.
Just wanted to remind everybody because we've made some progress and we've made some good strategies and we just need to keep at that so it doesn't catch up and bite us. Even your commentary talks about the utility ones, which we'll vote on next week, but
Yep.
it's not good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? Yes, Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. City Manager, this A, B, and C, is any of these going to affect our credit rating? Because we just had some number released and we're still doing very well. Will any of this borrowing affect that?
No. No, it won't, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
So, Mr. Wizard, can we borrow our way out of debt?
Borrow your way out of debt?
Yeah.
That's a question the city of Chicago would like an answer to.
Well, if we get 2% interest for cash invested and it only costs 1.something% to borrow.
So the first city manager I ever worked for told me this story. We were talking about how to balance the budget one day. And he mentioned that when he was working for a middle-sized city on the East Coast back in the 80s, that when they were short, they would just borrow a bunch of money and invest it at a higher rate and keep the cash and use that to plug the budget. And I looked at him and I said, this is why you can't nobody can have nice things, because what happened is the IRS in 1986 came in and they basically said, look, you can invest your bond proceeds at any rate that you want, but basically everything you earn over bond yield you have to send back to Uncle Sam. So they closed his loophole. There are some exceptions to that. If we spend the proceeds quickly enough, and one of the benefits of the way the city does its bonds is the projects are generally constructed by the time we bond. So on the day that we close on the financing, we've spent those proceeds. To the extent that you spend those proceeds relatively quickly, the IRS has safe harbors that say if you spend this percentage in this term, so on and so forth, you can actually keep the excess earnings in your construction fund. So there are some ways to get around that, but generally speaking, you can't earn more than what you're paying on your bonds. I know it.
Thought we'd solve the budget crisis.
Yes.
Additional questions for Mr. White? Seeing none, thank you very much. City Manager.
Thank you.
At this time, Finance Director Lee will come forward and provide information on the specifics for our sale today.
All right, thank you. Thank you, governing body. Just wanted to kind of take everything, all the great information Jeff just said as an overview and relate it down to the bond sale that we ran today and gave you an update on those numbers. So first of all, in front of you, you do have the 3 separate agenda items, and this is kind of a precursor to next week where you will have 2 agenda items as they relate to the revenue bonds. So the ordinance itself is for the general obligation bonds. The resolution is for the same amount, and then there's a final resolution for those temp notes. And there's different bond sales, as the auction summary in front of you summarizes, that relate to different, to each of those agenda items. And I'll walk you through those really quickly. First of all, a thank you to Columbia Capital. So in addition to Jeff White, Kaylin Dwyer is in the audience. They, of course, do the bond sale with us hand in hand and work with us along the way. And then in addition to that, Kevin Cowan from Gilmore and Bell. You can wave, or I told him do whatever's not awkward when I say your name, so I can introduce him. Of course, Gilmore and Bell is our new bond counsel who produces all of the legal documents and also works just hand in hand with us along the way. And definitely gave us some really good options with a couple of our different bond sales as we structured it this time. So we do conduct a competitive sale when we put up the bonds the day of, it always occurs the day of the night, like tonight, that you're closing on those documents. And because of that, as those of you know that have been here and done this a couple of times, those documents are always different the day you approve them from what's been posted in the agenda. So in front of you, you have a packet from Brenda that has the updated ordinance and resolution numbers. And if we've done a good job estimating, those numbers are very close to the original amounts, which in this case they are, so that's really good news. So those will be the documents that you actually will be approving tonight. So a couple of highlights just to the point that we've stated about the Standard & Poor's rating. That rating, as was reaffirmed, was really good news for the city of Topeka. And great question by Councilmember Cohen. Actually, before we get that rating, they ask us what was going to be included in that next bond sale. So they actually take this sale into account when giving us that rating. So that gives them a check and balance to make sure that they're not giving us a rating and then we're going in a totally different direction. And they actually review our entire 10-year CIP, so they're not looking at what we're doing tonight, but the entire 10-year of plans when they're giving us that rating. So luckily, the combination of really all of the great activity by the city and along with that bond rating gave us some really good results today, which are outlined in front of you on the City of Topeka Competitive Bond Auction Results page. So there's 4 different categories on here. Usually we have at least 2. Tonight there's 4, and I'll explain to you a little bit why. First, the general obligation notes. So those are the temp notes on the top left. We received 2 bids, which is great for temp notes. It is a higher rate this year, 1.7107 versus last year was a little under 1%. That's a market trend that every city is seeing, so that was really to be expected. Moving over there, right to the right, is the summary of bids on the taxable GO notes. So this is the portion of our temporary notes that we've worked with both Columbia Capital and Gilmore and Bell to deem that it should be considered taxable. What this relates to is the Oakland wastewater treatment plan. We walked you through during the CIP process. There will be a portion of that project that's expected to actually produce revenue for the system from the sale of gas through the pipeline. So that's a great thing. In the long run, it will pay off, but for now, we do have to actually pay taxes on those bonds since we will be making revenue on the sale of that issuance. The bottom left corner, and on that one, the bid from Commerce Bank is pretty much exactly where we priced that out to be and what we expected. The general obligation bonds on the bottom left, 7 bids is great. We received 7 bids last year. I think first year I was here, we received 2 or 3. So that number of bids is a really, really great amount. And the top winning bid was, again, right where we expected to be. Under 3% is a great number. A little bit higher than last year, 2.2%. But again, that's to be expected based on the market. And then kind of your last corner there, the general obligation bonds, Series 2018B, the zoo projects. So we've sent you all some communication about the private activity bond structure of these and future zoo projects. This is Kay's Garden and also the zoo project for the parking lot. And what this does is this gives us the ability to be more flexible with the use of the zoo as it relates to the Friends of the Zoo or nonprofits. So it gives us the flexibility in the future to be able to use those facilities in really better ways, kind of more fluidly in partnership with the nonprofit than we're currently able to do under kind of the strict rules of the GO bond. That one is actually interesting because that one we received 5 bids and the winning bid was actually lower than our GO bond bid. So actually that grouping ended up with the best rate of the GO bid of the night, and really it's because it happened second. So they saw the first bids come in and then decided to make it a little bit better than the first. So the zoo will actually be getting a better rate slightly than the rest of the GO bond projects, which is great. So then what will happen after tonight, upon the requested approval on all of the items, is the mayor's signature will give the final approval on these notes, and we will move on to next week's agenda item. Be happy to answer any questions before the first item.
Do we have any questions? Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. Nikki, when we get our quarterly financial reports, you know that when we had it at the end of last year, we had like 10 pages of open projects, and you were very helpful in going through those. And it turned out that a number of them even though our temp note costs were high, we're actually already geo bonded. Is that right? So is that in part why we're really only seeing 2018 projects here? Is there backup that hasn't been geo bonded yet from prior annual CIPs?
Yes, so what you're asking about and kind of what we clarified with you is, I think at one point there was a worry that that entire 10 pages of projects still needed to be bonded. And that would be quite frightening if you had not only this, but a future of, multiple millions of dollars. And the majority of those projects in that project report have actually received their proceeds. They're just finishing out the construction phase. So they've received their revenue, and most of them are 5 to a couple years old and have already received their money from the bond sale and are really working through the closing process. So what this relates to is mostly new projects. So the majority of these projects would be projects that were in the 2018 CIP, but there are some on here that had been approved in prior CIPs that might be appearing within this temp note sale. So there could, in this case, be a couple of projects from prior years that we hadn't started before, or that maybe we're doing a second year of temp notes on. So it's really a variety, and the best document to walk you through that is on the agenda item. There's an attachment that's got the specific project list. And what we do with bond counsel and all these projects is go back to all of those prior CIPs, check that they've been authorized, tie them back to what do we already have money on, what do we still need money on. So there are some projects on this list that might not have been in the most recent CIP and might have been either a couple years older or had prior money from temp notes.
And the 2018 ones we are already actively working on?
It depends on the project. So with the current CIB process, for example, when the 2017 CIP was passed, that gave us authority for the 17, 18, and 19 projects. So there could have been a case where in 2017 we went ahead and borrowed money for the 2018 or 2017 and 2018 project if the needs were there. In a lot of our cases that are programs like water line replacement or the infrastructure improvement where we have money every year, we typically have just been doing 1 year at a time. That way we can get through and finish the first set of money before we move on to the next. So it's really kind of a mixture of all the different scenarios.
In particular, if I may, it only totals about 7 million this year, and so I was wondering whether your expectation is that next year we might be more like at 11.
So technically the GEO bond total this year, you'd combine the 7 and the 5, so it ends up being about 12. And the reason that's above the 9 is that, for example, Kay's Garden,
Right.
we didn't
Yeah, I was
count
leaving
against the
that out.
cap, and then anywhere we have special assessments, those ones aren't against that $9 million cap.
Okay.
So next year should be more close to that $9 million number, kind of like it was last year, because I can't think of a major exception that we have on that category, but we won't know for sure until we get to about this point next year.
I'm the self-appointed worrier on this, in that the staff or the consultant was telling us that, just showing us the payoff chart, but not showing us what it would be if we added
Sure.
9 million a year. And so I was concerned that we might be adding even more next year.
So we, since the governing body policy is 9 million a year, then it's always at or around that number. And there's always kind of those exceptions in there, or there's something where, like you alluded to, 1 year maybe you borrow 7, and the next year you kind of make up for it with another project. But we've got a pretty good projection with them right now, where to the extent that we can anticipate that, we have an idea of how that's going to land next year. And like when we set the 2019 budget, we had to take that into account when presenting to you the 2019 debt service fund budget.
Thank you.
Additional questions for Nikki? Councilman Emerson.
Thank you,
I was
Mayor.
gonna say Henderson, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Mrs. Lee, I just had a question, and it's a great thing, but I noticed Commerce Bank gave us what looks like a lower interest rate on taxable bonds. And my experience is, taxable bonds usually have a higher rate because they have to pay tax on the interest they get. Is there any reason for that, or?
I don't know if Columbia Capital's got some insight. I think a lot of it depends on which auctions are open in which time, so they may have been watching that series for a specific reason. Do you have any insight on that?
Is that correct? It's normally the other way around?
It is, but the key thing is to make sure that you're comparing note to note and bond to bond. So when you compare the true interest cost on the taxable notes, which are 1 year in duration, to the tax exempt notes, the taxable notes actually were about a percentage point higher than the tax exempt notes.
Compare across the top versus.
Yeah, so just make sure you're comparing note to note rather than note to bond. Does that make sense? So the reason that the taxable rate looks lower than a tax exempt rate for the bonds is the bonds are repaid over 15 years and the notes are repaid over 1.
Okay, so that's also just a 1-year note
Correct.
on that? Okay.
Correct.
Thank
Yep,
you.
Yep.
Additional questions? Seeing no questions, I think that we're at the point of taking a look at the first action item, which is the ordinance for the general obligation bonds. This one is for the $7.4 million. What is the pleasure of the body? Councilwoman Clear.
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve by Councilwoman Clear. We have a second by Deputy Mayor. If there is no further comments, we now proceed with the voting.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now proceed to item B. If the clerk would read.
B is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout prescribing the form and details and authorizing and directing the sale and delivery of $7,225,000 aggregate principal amount of general obligation bonds Series 2018A and $5,285,000 aggregate principal amount of general obligation bonds Series 2018B zoo projects of the City of Topeka, Kansas, previously authorized by ordinance of the issuer, making certain covenants and agreements to provide for the payment and security thereof, and authorizing certain other documents and actions connected therewith.
City Manager.
I think we're covered with everything, Mayor.
I agree. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion for approval by the Deputy Mayor. We have a second by Councilwoman Clear. If there's no other questions or comments, we proceed with the voting.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes. Now we go to the third and last approval of bonds for the evening. If the clerk would read.
C is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout authorizing and directing the issuance, sale, and delivery of $44,045,000 in the aggregate principal amount of general obligation temporary renewal and improvement notes Series 2018A and $3,520,000 in the aggregate principal amount of taxable general obligation temporary notes Series 2018B of the City of Topeka, Kansas, providing for the levy and collection of an annual tax if necessary for the purpose of paying the principal of and the interest on said notes as they become due, making certain covenants and agreements to provide for the payment and security thereof, and authorizing certain other documents and actions connected therewith.
City Manager.
Only thing I'd add, Mayor, is I want to thank the team for the work that they did in pulling this together. Like as I said, good numbers. We're seeing changes in the market, but at least we're on a good track.
Thank you very much. To the body now, are there questions or comments, or are we ready to proceed? Councilwoman Claire.
Move to approve.
We have a motion for approval by Councilwoman Clear, a second by Councilman Padilla. If there's discussion, there's no discussion, we proceed with the voting.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now proceed with action item D. If the clerk would read.
D is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout, setting the public hearing to consider the advisability of establishing a community improvement district for the Cyrus Hotel located at 912 to 924 South Kansas Avenue, as more specifically described herein.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, governing body. Tonight, I'm requesting approval to set a hearing date for September 4th, 2018 for approval of a 2% CID application for the Topeka Grand Real Estate LLC. They're the owners and operators of the Cyrus Hotel. Doug will provide you with some additional information regarding the project.
Governing body, good evening. As the city manager noted, what we're asking you to do tonight in its most basic form is to adopt a resolution which sets a public hearing date of September 4th for this project. As those of you who've been through these kinds of projects before know, part of our process, not only by policy but also by state law, requires that we have some public hearings. And so if you adopt this resolution, it will set a public hearing date of September 4th for the project. So typically, we would have a more robust discussion of the project that night and come to you with some more details, as well as allow for public comment on that. But just by way of brief background tonight, about this time last year, we initiated some conversations with the Cyrus folks about their CID, about the possibility of maybe changing their CID from a 1% to a 2%. And we came to the conclusion that everyone would be agreeable to that approach. And so it's worked its way through the CID policy, which was adopted by the governing body several years ago in 2011, I think, and you have a copy of that in your packet. As part of that process, it goes through a review from staff. There's a 6-member staff review team that looks over, makes sure the application is correct. There's financial analysis, and then ultimately we present it to the governing body, which is the step we're at this evening. So we would respectfully request that you approve the resolution. I might also note that Seth Wagner, Don Highland, and Lucky DeFreeze are in the audience representing the developer if you have comments or questions for them.
At this point in time, I would like to ask the body if they would have any questions, either for staff or for the individuals representing the organization. Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. Doug, didn't they ask for 2% and we only gave them 1%?
Madam Mayor and Councilwoman Ortiz, that's correct. When this project was originally anticipated, their original application requested 2%. And at the time, it was the feeling from management and the body that 2% wasn't a number that anyone was comfortable with. That philosophy has changed, and so that brings us to this point, I would say.
What has changed? I mean, them building or?
Councilwoman, I think just philosophically, you have a different city manager in place. I'm deputy, I wasn't at that point. You have a different governing body, and I think just the general sense is 2% is appropriate for larger scale projects. For example, what we saw with Wheatfield last summer. That sort of broke the barrier as well.
Do the boundaries still stay the same downtown, or the whatever I'm trying to say,
Councilwoman, yes, the district boundaries stay exactly the same, correct.
which is basically downtown, correct? Or was?
No, ma'am, it's actually the hotel and the restaurant are the boundaries of this CID. So it's pretty location specific.
Oh, it is, this one, okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Mayor, we have a pretty big audience, and a lot of times what a CID is misunderstood, and there's also concern that it would be a loss of taxes to the city. Could we have Deputy City Manager explain it briefly so the audience knows what we're talking about?
Absolutely.
Madam Mayor and Councilwoman, CID stands for Community Improvement District. It's a statutorily authorized economic development tool that cities are allowed to use. And in a nutshell, what it does is it establishes a different tax rate, sales tax rate for the particular business or area in which it's incorporated by the boundaries of the district. So in this case, the hotel and the restaurant associated with this project would have a 2% additional sales tax. Those are not funds that we would have gotten anyways. Those funds go back into the project itself. And in fact, in this case, the amount of money that the project can recoup is capped at $5 million. So we anticipate the district may dissolve more quickly than a 1% district.
Thank you. I just wanted everybody in the audience to know it's a surcharge just on that project for the people who choose to go to that hotel or go to that restaurant, and the money stays right there. It's not our money in general. So, thank you. Thank you.
Additional comments or questions from the body? We have a motion by Councilwoman Ortiz. We have a second by the Deputy Mayor. Seeing no additional comments or questions, we now proceed with the voting.
You're too fast.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now proceed with item E, if the clerk would read.
E is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout, amending the district map referred to and made a part of the zoning ordinances by Section 1850-050 of the Topeka Municipal Code by providing for an amendment of the planned unit development master plan for the College Hill redevelopment subdivision to allow for the construction and operation of a dog park and pet exercise area as an interim use with the underlying PUD land use of 8 attached residential townhomes to remain in place for future construction on vacant property located at 1423 Southwest Lane Street.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Governing body, request for an amendment to this PUD in College Hill redevelopment subdivision is brought before you tonight. The Planning Commission approved the request, and Bill Finder, our Planning Department Director, is here to review the request.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Good evening, Your Honor, council members. So, yes, before you is an amendment to the College Hill PUD zoning. This is at 14th Lane. It includes a half-acre vacant lot, as you can see there, just north of the Pizza Pub business. A little bit of history on this parcel as well as the development. In 2006, a PUD was approved by this body to allow up to 188 apartment units, 33 townhomes, and associated retail. In 2014, there was a minor amendment to convert some of that retail into 10 more units. So all in all, there's about 226 units entitled for this property, for this PUD. On this particular parcel, there was a planned 8 townhomes, so 8 units. Those obviously have not been built. In lieu of, or I guess to have somewhat, admittedly, have some development forthcoming in the next couple of years, as an interim use, the new owners have proposed a dog park, pet exercise area for the tenants of the building, of the facility, and their guests. This was a significant change to the PUD, so that is why it's before you and went through the Planning Commission process as well. Some of the conditions of the park would be, there would be a fence, a 5-foot fence, chain link, decorative chain link around the perimeter of the property, set back from the streets by about 3 feet on the street sides, and it's pulled back about up to 23 feet from the business on the south side. There will be landscaping on the perimeter around the fence. There is also an allowed shade structure, which is about 20 by 40 in the park. The access to the park will be for the tenants and their guests from 6:30 a.m. to 11 p.m. There will be a code, access code gate for them to enter. So there would not be any. It's not for anybody but the tenants and their guests. As I mentioned, maybe not, as we went through the process, there was no opposition from the neighborhood except for representative of Pizza Pub, who opposed the project, indicating they think it would hurt their business. Planning Commission has, as indicated, has recommended approval with a stipulation, with a condition that there is a sunset to this use of 3 years. There was 6 votes for that. There was 2 against that, although those 2 votes by the planning commissioners were to extend that 3 years to 4 or 5 years as an interim use. We kind of landed on 3 years just to, A, get a return of investment for this park, for the owner, while also having some, keeping some pressure if you will, and some leverage to get the ultimate homes, townhomes built. So with that, we are recommending approval of the ordinance and ask for a motion to approve.
Are there any questions of Mr. Finder? Yes, Deputy Mayor.
So I'll start by asking why. Why are we doing this? We took this land from the people that owned it pretty much by force, if memory serves, and this is not at all what we promised them or the surrounding neighbors would be done with it. So why do they want to do this, especially if we're only allowing them to do this for 3 years?
Councilmember Jensen, there is a tremendous amount of dog owners in the facility, in the apartments. They do not have an amenity, they don't have a place, and they feel like this would be a good interim use as an amenity for those users. And attract
I hear you
residents.
telling me this is going to be permanent.
Pardon me?
What I hear you telling me is this is going to be permanent.
No, that is not what has been recommended.
Right, but I can read beyond the lines. If they're going to invest a significant amount of money to build a dog park for 3 years only, and then tear it down and build townhomes?
Well, I don't know about significant amount of money. There is an investment.
Landscaping, shade trees, fence. I just priced 30 feet of fence for my house, and it's $2,000.
So, well, that is why there is the sunset. So with this, an interim use does not turn into a permanent use. There is value to this use for this facility to see this successful.
Yeah, it sounds like they need a permanent facility somewhere, but it should not be here. I mean, this isn't what we took this land from its owners for. I can't support this. This isn't what we originally planned. So I appreciate that they're trying to do something with it, but this is not what it's supposed to be. And this is not. I mean, yes, the PUD is for 3 years, but I can almost guarantee you they'll be back to extend it. This isn't what we're supposed to be doing here. I don't agree.
Additional comments? Councilwoman Claire.
How long is that set vacant?
How long is it set vacant? Councilwoman Clear, the PUD was approved in 2006.
Well, gee, we might as well use it instead of it sitting there vacant. That's fine.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. I was going to ask about parking, but I guess if it's just for the residents, right? So it's not for the whole neighborhood. That's what I have issue with. It's not even for the whole neighborhood. How can this be approved, but they wanted to park in Oakland at Parks and Recs, and they wouldn't approve it there? I don't get it.
Councilwoman Ortiz, I'm not aware of that.
And so that's right to the north of the pizza place, right?
Yes.
What's on the east of that? Is that housing?
Correct. Across the alley would be housing, yes.
And across the street is that Lane, right?
To the west would be Lane, and that would be the apartments, which this would be an accessory use to those apartments, yes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councilman Padilla.
I wasn't sitting on the council when this occurred, and was listening to Councilman Jensen, and I agree. I drive through there quite a bit, and every time I go through there, I keep hoping for those townhomes to come in and complete it, because I still think there's really an opportunity to build that area up with residences. But I also see adjacent properties that are maybe not quite in good repair. I see foot traffic through there that may not be helpful to developing that area. I get concerned about, even though it's supposed to be just for the apartment residents, somebody who's going to monitor that. I mean, how's that going to be kept intact? I'm concerned about the effect on the people who go to the public, to the Pizza Hut, or to that pizza place there. I just don't see, I kind of share the concern that Councilman Jensen does, and that is, I think once that foot's in the door, I don't see that going away. And I really don't see that it will add to the environment in that neighborhood to bring on more development. I can't support the request myself.
Councilwoman Claire.
If you've been to Gage Park, to the Bark Park, there's just little animals running around, the people are in there, they're there for 30 minutes, they leave. I mean, it doesn't smell, they pick up the poo. In the pizza parlor, I would think that would add to the, I don't know, I would think that would add to their business. But it's just an amenity for the people that live there. It's just giving them something, which I don't see anything wrong with that. And I also think if we don't do this, that's going to sit there for another 3 years and nothing's going to be built. So, I mean, I think they have the right to give the homeowners, like build a swimming pool. Here's a swimming pool for your apartments. Well, here's Bark Park for your apartments. So I will support this. And they have a keypad, and that's how people aren't going to be able to get in. So I think it's a good idea.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I will agree with you that I'm not worried about the actual use of the Bark Park. You know, I've been to the one at Gage Park, and it's very well maintained. My issue is that the condition of getting this land through eminent domain was to build housing, not to build a Bark Park. So this body is then violating the promise that we made as part of that, and I'm not comfortable doing that. You know, it's sat vacant for all these years, I think in part because we haven't pushed that developer to uphold their side of the deal. And I don't know the backstory of that, I've asked for it, but I realize there's two sides to every story, but this land is vacant in part because we didn't demand that the developer fulfill their part of getting that land that we took through eminent domain. So I'm really not comfortable with this at all. It's not so much building the Bark Park, it's that that was not part of the original plan that eminent domain was used to execute. So, you know, we need to stick to the plan and do what we said we were going to do with that. And, you know, if they want to build a Bark Park as part of finishing the development there, that's one thing, but I don't see a development plan for any of that. You know, for another thing, that this is only for those residents, so this isn't going to help the surrounding businesses or surrounding anybody. It's only for the people that are in that facility, and it's quite a large apartment complex, so realistically, it's probably only for the folks that are across the street. This is not what we told people we were going to do with this property when we took it, and that's what I can't support that, so.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. I had asked questions about that legal commitment along the way of staff and got some answers that perhaps would be helpful to Councilman Jensen. They're a little painful, but I mean, within could you talk about how long that agreement goes, whoever the right person would be, and kind of where we are with it?
Councilmember Hiller, are you speaking of the redevelopment agreement? Yes. Okay, that was discussed with the body and some information was provided. Back in 2006, there was a Washburn Lane LLC that the city entered into an agreement with. About 4 years later, in 2010, there were some pieces of that development, as I understand it, that were not completed. Everything was done but for, I think, an area that's been called Building J. Staff, which is this lot here, staff sent a notice back in December 31st or set a deadline for that date to have Building J completed. It wasn't completed. The document was not recorded. The redevelopment agreement was never recorded by either of the parties. So you go down 16, 17, 18, where we are now, and the property has been sold to a different party. Washburn LLC has dissolved. Washburn Lane LLC. I think there were 4 partners, a couple in Lawrence and a couple here. And it's dissolved. The new owner owns the property. And so this is what he's proposing for the temporary period of time, as I understand it. And I believe we've had a discussion with him, and he indicated that he would be constructing apartments on that lot in a couple of years. He said 2, as I understood it.
I think my point was, and I didn't want to paraphrase it, but that right or wrong, that even the time length on that original agreement is close to expiration. Parties failed to file it in a timely manner so that the buyer knew about it, and here we are.
And if I may.
Deputy Mayor.
I don't disagree with giving the new buyer adequate time to react to that, but this is going to be a permanent thing. I can almost guarantee you that in 2 or 3 years, they'll come back and say, oh, yeah, we'd like to extend it. And I'm not comfortable with that. You know, we're supposed to have apartments there, or, you know, whatever was in that agreement. And I think that's what we should have been pushing for, and I think we need to push for that now. I'm wholeheartedly happy to give them a bit of an extension as new owners if they need to get their feet under them, that's fine, but not building something different that we all know is going to be a permanent fixture there. Thank you.
Additional comments or questions? Yes, Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Finder, was this property here, this specific property here, taken by eminent domain when we did that?
I couldn't answer that.
That would also make a difference to me, because as the deputy mayor said, you know, that's one of the most kind of severe things the government can do is take private property. And that would make a difference to me as well. So if, this is just a discussion item?
No, this is the action item.
Yeah. I would like to know that information if possible before voting.
Is there a need for us to go into a quick recess so the staff could look for that information to see if that was taken by eminent domain, or?
I'm not sure we would have the information
We
there.
wouldn't have the
and we would be able to
information.
find it even in a recess. It would
Okay.
be a much bigger issue.
Councilman Mays.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a real quick question also, kind of in that same line of thought. Were there houses there that were demolished in order to make way for the building J?
There were, I don't know what, I can't answer when they were demolished.
I can.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
They were demolished.
I don't think there was any eminent domain, though. It was quite an issue, if you recall.
Councilwoman Hiller.
About Jerry's Bike Shop and whether that was at the time when the issues of whether, you know, local units of government would use eminent domain or not. There was a lot of negotiation that occurred at the time, but I don't think there was. There were promises, and the city invested some money in the purchase of either the parcel that's in question, or there was some city investment in that.
City Manager.
We received a note from Mary Feeney that she does not believe that it was, but in order for us, if that is an issue that we need to consider, then we will need to defer in order to be able to give you a definitive answer.
I appreciate that. Whether we used eminent domain or not, if we didn't, then it's much better. I would wholeheartedly agree. We still made a promise, and we need to keep that promise. And I don't think a permanent bark park, even though it says 3 years, mark my words, it'll be extended. We made a promise. I think we need to uphold that.
Councilman Cohen.
Could we vote on this next week and just put this off a week?
So are you making a motion to recess
I'm just
this
asking,
item?
I'm just asking. I mean, is that
Yes,
something?
we can.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we put this off for 1 week. We visit this again next week.
We have a motion and we have a second for this item to be brought back again next week. Any further discussion on the item? Councilwoman Hiller.
A question for legal, in that this is a planning commission report, and we are asking about information that was not in the report that came to us. Now, I don't want to complicate it further, but we'd have to remand it back to the planning commission for more information as well.
Remand it to them.
Now we could defer it and then make the decision.
Just want to make sure we know what we're doing.
Yes, Mayor, we can defer the action. I mean, that's one of the things the action, when you go to make an action, it's one of these 4 items that we go to make an action on. But at the point, if we have information that we need, we can simply defer, as was motioned, until the next meeting, gather that information and bring it back to you.
However, Councilwoman Hiller asked if we have to remand it back to the Planning Commission.
No, I
No?
don't believe
Okay.
you need to do that. I think maybe what you were asking too is how many votes Councilmember Hiller would be needed, but I think we can defer the item. We're not taking action on it, so we can defer it. When we take action, it has to be one of these items.
The clarification was, I thought that if we were using in our deliberations information that was not used by the Planning Commission, we were always supposed to refer it back at least for 1 round so that the Planning Commission could consider that as well.
That's true, Bill. I don't think you all ever discussed anything about the underlying development agreement in the planning commission meeting. This was just a flat consideration of the Bark Park. Because what I would say is, with the fact that the redevelopment agreement was never recorded, it's not binding on the subsequent owner, at least in our opinion. So even if we found out that, there was not eminent domain and it came back before the body next week, you're likely going to have the same kind of, I guess, conundrums to have to deal with, because there's an agreement that simply was not recorded back in 2010. And so basically there's a new owner. The company that we did have the development agreement with dissolved. This new owner's not bound by it. And so he's asking, I guess, for a 3-year temporary use, and has indicated to several of us verbally that at the end of that, he would in fact construct apartments on that lot. And that's what we have. But he's not required to. He just stated that he would.
So we have a motion, we have a second. So at this point in time, the vote would be whether to vote on it tonight or send it back. So a vote for yes would be sending it back for next week. And a vote for no would be that we will come back and address the item so that we can vote on it tonight. Yes, Councilman, Deputy Mayor.
If we remand it to the Planning Commission, can we request that they get a commitment in writing for a specified period of time before they would actually begin building apartments?
I think we could ask him to do that. I don't know that we can require an individual to do something of that magnitude on property that he owns without, I mean, it's his property, he owns it. There's not a development agreement that he's bound to comply with.
We can't do that as a condition of approving the PUD.
That's a pretty big condition.
City Manager.
The thing that I would say is that we need to look at what the vote was of the Planning Commission. Their vote was 6-2, and then 2 of them additionally were willing to make that an even longer period of time. So even if, for them, they didn't need anything in writing. So really, it's something, if you're concerned about it, there's really no reason to put it back to Planning Commission, because they were much more liberal and asking for way less as proof to approve this. So there's really no reason to remand it back to them. This is something that if you feel this way and others do, that it's a decision that needs to be made here. There's not going to be anything gained by sending it back to them, because you're looking at being more strict even more and placing more requirements on it versus what they were willing to do. So remanding it won't benefit anything.
If we delay it, can we do that at all? That's my biggest fear, is that this is not what we originally planned to do with it. If he needs a couple of years, again, happy to give that to him. If he'll commit to build the thing in writing with an actual correctly filed agreement, and it wasn't imminently, or taken by eminent domain.
Condition of the PUD.
No, I don't think
Okay.
I think that's the issue, in that it cannot,
Yeah.
that probably is not likely an issue that you would have in the condition of the PUD.
Okay.
And so,
So we're
even
still
though that
stuck.
would be desirable,
Yeah.
it would not be a typical requirement in a PUD.
Okay. So we're still stuck with a permanent bar permit then, pending some written agreement. Okay. All right, thank you.
So again, at this point in time, the vote is, a vote for yes is sending this to next week's agenda. A vote for no, we would come back and keep discussing this to vote it up or down. Okay? So we proceed with the voting.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, this item is moved to next week. We now proceed with item F, if the clerk would read.
F is discussion and overview of the City of Topeka 2019 Consolidated Annual Action Plan and a public hearing for the purpose of obtaining public input on the 2019 City of Topeka Consolidated Annual Action Plan.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Governing body, tonight we are considering the 2019 Consolidated Action Plan. It is brought before you in order to conduct a public hearing. Neighborhood Relations Director Sasha Hahn will present the information concerning the 2017 uses and our purposes that are proposed for the 2019 plan. It is a public hearing after her comments, and obviously we look at making sure that we look at the combined, any comments that are made, keeping them in line and not repeating as we go forward.
Do we have any questions of Ms. Hahn? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Good evening, governing body members. I do have a presentation for you this evening, and then we will ask you to hold a public hearing about the 2019, or the proposed 2019 Consolidated Action Plan. Okay, look at that. All right, so to start with, why do we have a plan? And I want to begin, since we have a few new members on the council. We have actually 2 plans. We submit a 5-year consolidated action plan to HUD that is kind of the 30,000-foot overarching goals for what we'd like to do with the HUD funds that we receive. And then each year we submit an annual action plan that has the detailed program information on how we intend to spend those dollars that were allocated by HUD. So this is our 1-year planning and resource allocation document for 2019. It is an assessment of our affordable housing and market conditions, and it is required by HUD in order to receive the entitlement grant funding that we do. In addition to that, we like to coordinate this process with our annual city budget process because they're linked together through some of the projects and the funding that are tied together as commitments for our HUD funding. So HUD has some rather large overarching objectives that we intend to meet and we're required to strive towards, and that includes availability and accessibility, affordability, and sustainability. And then we here in the City of Topeka and in the Department of Neighborhood Relations, we have more specific goals that and objectives that we're striving for our community. We, of course, strive to enhance the quality of our neighborhoods, to increase home ownership, enhance housing with supportive services, and that's our Shelter Plus Care program, and I'll talk briefly about that later. And we also love to leverage other resources and work with our housing partners in the community. So the funds that are included in our HUD funding that we receive annually are the Community Development Block Grant, the Emergency Solutions Grant, the Continuum of Care Grant, which funds our Shelter Plus Care program, and the Home Investment Partnership. The totals that you see listed up here on the presentation are the funding amounts that we received for 2018. Just like the city budget, when we put together our next year's budget for our HUD funds, we are estimating, and we always use the current totals that we've been awarded from HUD as a conservative estimate to base our budget on for the next year. So out of our CDBG and Home Investment Partnership funding, the programs are listed that we fund with those dollars, and you'll see that we have various programs for housing rehabilitation and demolition. We do development and redevelopment partnerships with Habitat for Humanity, Cornerstone, and other agencies in the community. The Topeka Opportunity to Own is our home ownership program that we coordinate with Housing and Credit Counseling for. They administer for it for us and provide homeowner counseling, and then we provide funding for the program. We also provide funding for various neighborhood support programs such as grant programming, anti-blight activities, NIA support funding, and also our social service grants are in part funded with CDBG funding. The other two grants that we receive are the ESG grant and Continuum of Care, which again funds our Shelter Plus Care program. The Emergency Solution Grant is really targeted at emergency situations and helping prevent homelessness and helping folks that are in an emergency situation. Our Continuum of Care program, and specifically Shelter Plus Care, is a housing rent subsidy for folks that suffer from severe and persistent mental health issues or substance abuse issues. And they do have to be in supportive services and have a case management in order to be involved in our Shelter Plus Care program. So you have included in your information this evening this sheet, 2017 summary, and that's where these numbers are a compilation of the information that was provided on that sheet. But just wanted to share with you some of the projects that we were able to accomplish in the community with our funding in 2017. 32 home rehab projects, and that just counts the rehabs that we did with our HUD funding. If we counted the partnerships with Habitat for Humanity and Community Action out in the Highcrest neighborhood, that number would be higher. 48 owner-occupied emergency repair projects, and those emergency repair projects are health and life safety issues that we're addressing. So a leaking roof, or your sewer line has failed, or your hot water heater or furnace is leaking carbon monoxide. So we're really trying to address life safety needs in the homes in the community. The accessibility program offers accessibility modifications for homes of folks that have mobility issues. So if you need your doors widened or your bathroom modified so that you can stay in your home with a mobility issue like a wheelchair or a walker or something like that, that's what that program is targeting. 5 voluntary demolitions, and these are only demolitions paid for with those HUD funds. This is separate from our demolition program in the property maintenance division. We were able to assist 10 first-time home buyers through our TOTO program in cooperation with Housing and Credit Counseling. And 145 individuals received home buyer counseling through HCCI. 3 infill housing projects, which a couple of those were on PAL, and I'm trying to remember where the third was, and I'm sorry I don't have the information this evening. But then the 2 infill projects with Cornerstone were over in North Topeka. Some of you may remember we were able to build 2 single-family homes with them. And finally, these are more of the emergency services that were provided. 80 renters were provided deposit assistance through Shelter Plus Care, and then an additional 230 households that were at risk of homelessness received shelter assistance and essential services, and 33 agencies were received funding through our ECD grant, social service grant funding program, and that is estimated to have provided services to approximately 23,000 people in the community. So how do we involve citizens? HUD requires that we get public input. This year we did a few more meetings than we have done traditionally. Corey from our Housing Services Division met up with a bunch of her social service partners that she works with on the Homeless Task Force, and they did a Continuum of Care presentation at that meeting. She also held 2 public meetings that we invited the public to attend to provide us input, and we also do receive emails and written correspondence from the public. in terms of comments on our con plan. We did present at the Citizens Advisory Council this year, as we always do, but we changed it up a little bit and had some discussion groups for them and got some really great feedback from that group. There is a 30-day public comment period that we're just wrapping up now, and we publish that notification for folks to be aware that they can comment. And then, of course, the public hearing this evening would be our final public hearing for the 2019 Consolidated Action Plan. With that, I would be delighted to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions for the body? Seeing none? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this point in time, it's a procedural moment in which we open up a public hearing. That way, any individual that was not able to provide public comment with regards to this item can feel free to do so. You did not have to sign up to speak. So we open up the public hearing at this point in time, and we ask if there's any individual that would like to speak about the Consolidated Action Plan. We have one individual. If you could please approach the mic.
Good evening. My name's Shanae. You know me as a staff member for the Topeka Jump organization. We actually have a few members who are going to be speaking before you on the budget hearing piece. You'll see that the topic that we will be addressing is also affordable housing. I thought that I should use this time to give you a little bit of context as to why we chose to speak during the budget hearing versus this plan. We support the con plan. There's a distinction that needs to be made between what we do for owner-occupied units and what we do for renter units. And so what we found as an organization and in our research is that the Consolidated Action Plan does a lot for owner-occupied homes. They do some for rentership, but our stance is that we need to see more for renters in our community. And so reviewing the plan, we see numbers like an additional home being constructed over the next year. There are over 700 people who will receive rental assistance in some way. We see numbers like 27 renter homes being given emergency rehab assistance, but a lot of the other numbers really address owner-occupied homes. So I want to make that distinction for you here so that you understand why we're still standing before you and speaking almost exclusively about rentership. The 700 households that are supported by rental assistance is amazing. As you know, HUD dollars have been under fire, and they probably will continue to be. And so imagine not being able to provide that rental assistance through the funds that we get from the federal government. If we don't start to build a safety net for what could happen now, then even that, could be a major loss. So I wanted to provide some context so that you understand why members of the community are going to be standing before you continuing to talk about affordable housing. That's it.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else that would like to speak? Going once. I'm supposed to ask 3 times? Anybody else who would ask to speak? And the 3rd time, is there anybody else that would like to speak to this issue? Okay, seeing no other additional individuals, the public comment session, the public hearing is closed. At this point in time, what is the, yes, Deputy Mayor.
Can I ask a question about this, another round of public comment?
Of course.
If that's okay. So I just wanted to, part of the reason I understand that we don't spend much money on rental properties is because the homeowner nor the city have the authority to make some of these changes to the property that the person occupying doesn't have the right to do. Is that correct? I mean, obviously, if it's a health emergency, then that's one thing, but we're not allowed to just go work on people's property, correct?
There are a couple of programs that we actually offer on rental properties as part of our SORT, which is Stages of of resource targeting grant that the NIAs can compete for. We do have 2 tracks of rehab for that. We offer on rental properties up to $15,000 in exterior rehabilitation. The landlord does have to put the first 10% down, and then after the first 7 years that the home is occupied by a low-income individual, 60% of that dollar amount is forgiven. So you end up with half of it left on there, a little less than half. The accessibility program is also available to rental properties. I don't believe that the.
But these are programs for the person who owns the property, not necessarily the tenant, though, correct?
Well, it's improving the condition of the home, which
And that's
benefits
true,
the
but
tenant.
my understanding was she was advocating for us spending money at the tenant's discretion on a piece of property they don't own, and my understanding is we can't do that, correct?
Yeah, that we need the owner, we enter into agreements with the property owner.
Right, so if it's a tenant that needs a doorknob fixed, we can't do that type of work. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but.
No, but they can call code enforcement.
Well, that's a whole other discussion. Thank you. That is my question. I just wanted to make sure that part of the reason why we don't spend as much money on the tenant side is because they don't own the property. We don't have the right to go in and make changes without permission of the homeowner.
Additional comments or questions for the body? If there is no additional comments or questions, what is the pleasure of the body?
Just a public hearing.
Oh, it's just the public, there is no voting for this one?
Next week.
Next week. There we go. We now proceed with item G.
G is a public hearing to obtain public input and answer questions and objections from the taxpayers regarding the proposed 2019 City of Topeka operating budget.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight is the next step in the 2019 budget process. To recap, we've had 2 budget workshops, 2 discussions at council meetings in June and July. On July 10th, you set the maximum taxes levied. In addition, we have held a number of informal hearings, both online and in person. However, per state law, the city is required to have a formal budget hearing prior to the adoption of the budget. We look forward to a hearing tonight from the public in anticipation of adopting the budget next Tuesday, August 14th.
We have 4 individuals signed up to speak. The first person signed up to speak is Ernestine Adams.
Thank you. My name is Ernestine Adams, Mayor de la Isla, council members, staff members. Thank you for listening. Could the people representing Topeka jump please stand if you're able? Thank you. Topeka Jump has stood before this council time and again, stressing the dire state of 9,000 families in our communities. Families that have no access to safe and affordable housing. To clarify Shanae's remarks, she wasn't asking for money for renters. She was asking for a solution to the affordable housing crisis that we are experiencing. Families that have no access to safe and affordable housing. Not only do we present the problem, we presented a solution, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. This proven practice is transforming communities across the country. We want this strategy to do the same thing here. To do that, it will require some public money. We've heard people say, we just can't afford to do this. But it is easy for some on the council and otherwise to forget the cost of not investing in affordable housing. Without stable housing, employees are less productive at work. Without stable housing, people recovering from addiction are more likely to relapse. Without stable housing, people struggling with mental health problems are more likely to end up in jail. Without stable housing, children struggle to focus on their schoolwork and fail to develop relationships that help their emotional health. Without stable housing, children forced to move frequently are more likely to have chronic and poor physical health conditions. Without stable housing, people evicted from their homes are at an even higher risk of suicide. These are the costs for ignoring our housing problem. On the other hand, investing in safe, affordable housing strengthens families and the economy with stable housing. With stable housing, employers are more productive at work. With stable housing, people with mental illness and substance abuse issues are more likely to experience recovery. With stable housing, children are healthier and more successful in the classroom. With stable housing, perhaps people with a felony record who cannot live in public housing can still have a second chance at life. The reality is we cannot afford not to invest in safe, affordable housing. I don't like to replace tires because of pothole damage, but it's hard to watch the city make significant investments in streets, shopping plazas, and downtown, when 9,000 families are living on the edge of homelessness.
Ma'am, the time has expired.
I have one paragraph.
Would you like an extension of time?
May I have an extension?
How much would you need, a minute or 2 minutes?
A minute.
1 minute? Okay.
So 2 minutes.
2 minutes? So we have a motion and a second by Councilwoman Ortiz. We now proceed with the voting to extend for 2 minutes.
I'm sorry. I fear that a blind eye is being turned to the unsafe, unaffordable housing that exists in some of our neighborhoods. How can you ask us to spend $14 million of taxpayer money a year for streets when you're not willing to make a serious investment in safe and affordable housing? Home is a core value for every Topeka family, and we want to see that reflected in the city's budget. In the words of our mayor, our citizens need good roads, but they need a place to sleep. Housing first. Housing first. We can't afford to wait. Thank you.
Next person signed up to speak is Latricia Kears. Thank you for your comments, ma'am.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Latricia Cyrus. I've lived in Topeka the majority of my life. I'm a member of Apostolic Church of Jesus Christ. I'm here to speak on behalf of Topeka Jump, a grassroots group who speaks loudly for policies and funding changes that positively impact most vulnerable and valuable populations, like people living below the poverty line, the elderly, children, and so forth. As you know, we have been urging the government body to make safe and affordable housing a bigger priority for 3 years now. We have great things happening with affordable housing, like raising of the walls for the phase build this past weekend. The single-family housing, the single-family home and rehabilitation that Cornerstones and Habitat continue to do are invaluable to our community. However, the level of need in Topeka has long since been outpacing our level of production. So we've got to do something different. Mayor Michelle De La Isa, we appreciate that you have been a champion for identifying private sector support for the revised Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We are here today because we expect to see that our city budget reflects the values of the people who live here. After 3 years, we still believe something very important is missing: more safe and affordable housing, construction, and rehabilitation. The Dynamic Core project to revitalize downtown has great energy to business professionals who want to have a good time on Friday night and can spend $200 on food and fun. The half-cent sales tax being proposed exclusively for streets have given great energy to folks who live a pretty slow-paced yet comfortable life, and whose biggest frustration is the potholes that they hit on the way to the grocery store. But what about people living in a property? They would worry about streets if they did not have to worry about the roof over their head. They would love to shoot the breeze downtown if they had $50 of disposable income. What's in this budget for them? In a previous meeting, we heard Madam Mayor say, housing first. Safe and affordable housing is one value that we have demonstrated hundreds and literally thousands of people can visibly get behind. Thank you. And for every visible supporters, there are two whose faces you will never see. This body needs to figure out how to do safe, affordable housing on a larger scale than we already are. Private money is great and it's necessary, but poor people's taxes make up this budget too. We want to see more for safe and affordable housing in our budget funded by our tax dollars. Housing first. Thank you.
Next person signed up to speak is Pastor Anthony Divers.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. You've heard quite a bit. Reason why this project is so dear to my heart. I have one of my members of my church, 70-year-old woman, that her income, she's disability, is $799. Out of the $799, $375 is spent on rent. $110 on electricity, $55 on gas, $45 on water. And because she is disability, she has assistance that comes out of her pocket of $56. The house that she stays in does not have any guttering. It's got holes around the door, lets in snakes. She told me about snake that she almost stepped on, mice, ropes. In the wintertime, the water freezes up the door. She has to have somebody come along and let her out of her house. Summertime, of course, she's hot and she has to cope with it. I'm for Jump for Justice and this project of a trust fund because I believe that now is the time for us to be concerned about the people in Topeka. Now's the time that I've lived here all of my life, and the other day I looked around our city. I was almost embarrassed. I said, how can somebody live like that? I would like to say, would you want to live in that kind of home for a month, less known a week? What would be your approach to that? I pulled from your compassion. Jesus was moved with compassion to take care of the need. There's a need in our city to support affordable housing and help people that don't have income to have something to pull from in a trust fund. Let's make our dollars count. If we could double the amount of money that Topeka put into it, wouldn't it be worth it? Wouldn't it be worth voting yes for a housing trust fund? I believe if you allow your heart to lead you, you will see the need that we support not only our senior citizens, but all those that have below wages to have affordable rent in housing. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. The next person signed up to speak is Mr. Joseph Ledbetter.
Everybody, how you doing? The first concern I've got with these budget hearings is there's too much to comment on to take 4 minutes. And I'm going to need more time, and I'm just going to tell you that in advance. When I go over to the county and speak at their budget hearings, we have unlimited time. Now, that usually is wrapped up in 8 to 10 minutes, and their budget is a third what your budget is. And I did take up a lot more time speaking than 4 minutes to them about parks and rec needs, and we had some successes. So that's where I'm going to start. We heard about the housing needs. I did not come down here and prepared to talk about that, but I will say this, and I've said it for 3 years, and I said it when I was President Highcrest. You've got to enforce the codes on these landlords and these absentee homeowners. And what I mean by that is we even have people, even in my neighborhood at 415 Southwest Hillside, that live in Manhattan, I'm told. We've had to deal with this monstrosity. We call it the Addams Family House. Vine covered, ridiculous. I've sent you photos. I'm getting no action other than there's a sign in the yard now saying we're going to do something. But it's been 3 years. These processes take entirely too long. Even nice neighborhoods are worn down by these absentee owners refusing to fix their properties. It concerns me when, as a lawyer, I come down here and I see council members asking about codes and their concerns about codes, and they seem to be brushed off by staff. I don't appreciate that. I appreciate that this council is the body that governs this city. And so when I observe these things in the audience, it concerns me. You are the directors of this city. The city staff answers to you. You answer to the people. A couple of things I am concerned about. I heard there was 5 new positions proposed by the administration. I oppose that. There was one position that I would support, and that's the one with the zoo. And Friends of the Zoo is a very good organization. We have a well-run zoo now. I support whatever Brendan asks for. That's how I feel about people who do good jobs. I don't feel that way about people who don't do good jobs. And I'm going to talk about some of that. I am absolutely for the police. The police have probably a 97% support in this community. They're the thin blue line that saves our community every day from chaos and anarchy. Those are dangerous jobs. That's why it's hard to recruit for them. Just like not everybody can be a police officer and not everybody can be a Marine, and vice versa. You're just going to have to accept that and try to work with our police to do what they can do with a very difficult job that's getting more dangerous all the time. Just read the national statistics. I support the police in their request for money for the CIT unit. The mental health issues in this community are bad. They're starting to get worse. We've got to have these social workers that they need to interact with people that are off their meds, off drugs, who are a danger not only to themselves, but to neighbors, professionals they come into contact with, police, relatives, and, they've got, I believe in intervention, I believe in helping them. But if they're going to commit criminal acts, they're going to have to face those consequences too if they refuse to get the help. I'm going to ask for an extension. I'm going to ask for 6 minutes because I want to get all this on record, if you would be so kind.
We have a motion made by Councilwoman Ortiz. We have a second by Deputy Mayor. We now proceed with the voting.
Seven yes.
7 having voting yes, the motion passes.
Thank you for those that voted yes. You want to listen to good policy comments. I am very much concerned about the cost going out of control of this body. I'm going to talk about water. We have raised our water rates consistently. We just raised them. It's going to be 20% over the next 2 years in December. Not all of you voted for that. We are being told we cannot have a second shift by the bargaining unit, the union that represents the workers. I find that ridiculous. We need a second shift so we can fix these problems where we have broken pipes in the streets. Recently, I saw 2 different times when the intersections at 21st and Topeka Boulevard were shut down for over 3 weeks. And I wondered, if we had a second shift for the water department, could we have gotten those streets open quicker? There are small businesses being affected, car lots being affected. These are business people. They've got to pay taxes, they've got to pay leases, they've got to pay for their cost of doing business, whether that street is open or not. I think a little bit more mercy for our small businesses would be in order in this community. I am very concerned about the cost of revenue bonds going out of control with the utilities. I have sent you tonight some of your own graphs from the City of Topeka documents that shows your ballooning debt continuing to escalate with revenue bonds that are very expensive. I showed you that one of the projects they talked about doing $15 million worth of work for is going to cost you $19.5 million to pay for. Not you, but the ratepayers out here. These people that can't afford rent also can't afford higher water bills and sewer bills. So I'm not sure that we're really listening to the concerns about the lack of productivity in some of these departments. The next item I'm concerned about is we are not just spending $14 million a year on streets, as was said earlier. We're spending $23 million a year on streets. We also get the half-cent sales tax money from the county from the 2014 vote, which enacted in 2016. So we get a lot of misinformation. I'm not blaming them. But it seems like we get a lot of misinformation. We don't tell the whole story down here about all the money we do get. We get lots of money. 2 months ago, I asked for a SOP on how we fix potholes. I asked twice of the city administration. I could not get it until the other day, after I got an SOP from the county explaining how they fix their potholes. I don't think that's coincidental. I just find it interesting. The policy that the county has on fixing potholes makes sure that these potholes are completely cleaned out with pressurized air. And I watched the county do it, it's in their SOPs, and I've seen Beddits do it for the city of Topeka as a contractor. What I don't see is city employees doing it. And then in this latest SOP that came out, they said they can use leaf blowers. Well, that's great for getting leaves out, but does it get the rest of the debris out? And when I asked Tom Block, who's an expert at fixing streets and fixes them on time for the county and fixes his projects on time, he said that will not work. He said you have to use pressurized air to clean these out. Now, what's the big deal about a pothole? It's not about knocking your tires out, and it's not about the realignments. It's about the fact that you're letting water into the subbase of these roads, and you're destroying the subbase of the roads, and that's what's expensive. So if the people, the 55 personnel we've got at $7 million to repair these streets are not fixing them properly, even if they're not fixing them half the time properly, we are doing long-term, tremendous damage to the subsurface because the water is getting into the streets. I also was talking more to Tom about this, because I decided I was just going to pay for his lunch. I wanted some information out of him before he left this fine city, and goes to Des Moines. And he's the director of Public Works with the county. And he told me that if we would just do snow removal on our streets, we would clear the water off the streets, and then we would not have the ice and thaw problems that we've got that are breaking up the surfaces and the subsurfaces of our roads. I said, that's an idea. He said, it works for the county. Now, they've got half the street miles we've got, but they've got about half the staff, too. And one of the things Tom told me is he said his employees have an excellent attitude about their work. They want to make sure that it holds up. He said their goal is to make sure that a pothole doesn't get called back on for an entire year. They log these numbers. And I said, well, I've showed potholes that weren't fixed or were fixed close to my law office that were out within 2 months. And nobody came back and fixed them after that. So what I'm looking for tonight in the budget is I want to see productivity gains. I want to see our manager come up with ideas that absolutely stun me and shock me at how productive they are. And I want to be astounded. And that's what I want out of city government. I want you to astound us at how you're going to fix things. Quick and cheap, or cheaper. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you for your comments. At this time, we are still in the middle of a public hearing. Therefore, anybody that would like to speak in the audience that did not sign up to speak is able to do so. So I will ask the 3 times. Does anybody want to speak? Is anybody interested from the audience in speaking again to the body before we close the session? And as 3rd time, is anybody interested in speaking to the public hearing? Seeing no additional individuals that would like to speak with regards to the public hearing, this public hearing is now closed. We now proceed to the non-action items. City Clerk.
A is a discussion regarding the legislative priorities identified by the governing body to be addressed or monitored during the 2019 legislative session.
It's 8 o'clock. If the body would be able to recess while the room empties out, would everybody be okay with that? Okay, so we're going to have a 5-minute recess before Whitney comes and gives us our legislative update. That allows the room to get emptied.